The breakup of the Beatles in 1970 marked a seismic moment in music history. For decades, fans around the world have debated one burning question: what really caused the end of the most iconic band in the world? At the center of it all stood one woman, Yoko Ono. For years, she was painted as the villain, accused of driving a wedge between John Lennon and the rest of the band. But now, at 82, Paul McCartney has finally spoken the truth that fans have suspected for years. It wasn't just Yoko. At the height of Beatlemania, John, Paul, George, and Ringo were untouchable. But behind the dazzling smiles and sold-out shows, tensions were slowly rising. Creative differences, personal struggles, and shifting ambitions started pulling them apart. John's deep relationship with Yoko Ono added a new element to that fragile mix. She wasn't just his partner. She became a creative force in his life, always by his side, even during recording sessions. At the time, Paul admitted it felt like an intrusion, calling it interference in the workplace. But decades later, in his podcast McCartney, A Life in Lyrics, he softened that stance, acknowledging that John and Yoko's connection was powerful and genuine, and that it wasn't fair to blame her for everything. For years, McCartney remained silent as the public narrative twisted. Many believed he was the one who walked away, but in reality, John had already decided to leave before Paul made it official. That silence, Paul admitted, weighed heavily on him. Even without Yoko, the band's foundation was already crumbling. Yoko herself once said being blamed for breaking up the Beatles was like being falsely accused of murder, and today, Paul agrees. Looking back, he admits the group's problems were far more complex, and that Yoko simply became the easiest target. Paul has since praised John and Yoko as a great couple, even admiring their strength and creativity together. So what really caused the Beatles' breakup? According to McCartney, it was never about one person. It was a mix of artistic tension, ego clashes, and devastating business troubles. John was diving into experimental music influenced by Yoko's avant-garde style, while Paul leaned toward structured, melodic pop. Their once magic songwriting partnership had turned into a creative tug-of-war. Meanwhile, George Harrison felt increasingly overshadowed. Despite writing masterpieces like Here Comes the Sun and Something, he was often sidelined in the Lennon-McCartney-dominated sessions. At one point, Harrison even walked out of the studio, frustrated and unheard. Then came the business chaos. After the tragic death of their longtime manager Brian Epstein in 1967, the band lost its sense of unity. McCartney clashed with new manager Alan Klein over finances, sparking bitter disputes that eventually ended in lawsuits. When Paul sued to dissolve the band, it wasn't out of anger, it was out of necessity. The dream had already fractured. In the aftermath, McCartney fell into a deep depression, isolating himself in Scotland and drowning his sorrow in alcohol. It was Linda, his wife, who helped him rebuild, encouraging him to find his spark again. That painful rebirth gave rise to his solo career and his next great chapter, the formation of Wings. Even with all his later success, the Beatles' shadow never truly left him. Today, McCartney views that breakup with peace and understanding. He no longer sees it as a tragedy, but as the inevitable evolution of four extraordinary men growing in different directions. The Beatles didn't fall apart because of one person. They ended because the magic that united them could no longer contain the weight of fame, creativity, and change. The pressures were immense, the joy had faded, and the world's most beloved band had simply reached its natural end. In the end, Paul McCartney's words finally put the truth to rest. Yoko Ono wasn't the villain. The Beatles' breakup wasn't about blame. It was about growth, transformation, and the closing of one of music's greatest chapters. This is StarLoop News, where we bring you the untold truths behind the legends. If you love this deep dive into the Beatles' final days, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the real stories behind music's biggest icons.